thank you for having me. Oh, there's a bit of echo.
It's better than echo.
Testing. Okay, that sounds good. Thanks, it's great to be here. Welcome to the official book launch of Australian Native Bonsai.
Yay.
The official book launch. You know, I had to come to what's almost the biggest bonsai club in Australia to launch this book, and I thought it was an appropriate place to do so. So this is its first public airing. I asked Lee Tafe to have a read for me, please, and give me a critique and tell me what he thought. He told me what he thought. Apparently it's going to be good for Australian bonsai. Well, you know, that's what I hoped, and let's hope it will have that result. It's been an interesting project to be involved with. I don't know if anybody's ever engaged on some sort of project or an activity, and you get along the track and you think, okay, I'm nearly there. Just, you know, I'm kind of 95% of the way and I'll be done. And you get another 5% and you suddenly realise, oh no, I'm only halfway there. And you do another lot of work and you think, oh, I'm really there this time, but oh no, it's still only halfway. So it goes on and on and on. It's quite a labour of love. It's a great exercise. I would love to have had champagne and biscuits and cheese. That's what I would do for a book launch, but unfortunately it's a bit hard to do when I'm away from home, but we do have coffee and biscuits. So good luck to you all. I do have a few copies here if anybody's interested. What can I say? I was here a few years ago. I don't know how many people were here for that night.
Yes.
Do you remember the presentation?
Yeah.
Do anybody here who is not at that presentation? No? Okay, so I thought that, you know, every club has a bit of turnover, and 5 years is a long time. Now, there have been a couple of false starts. I nearly came back once or twice. But, you know, there's one or two things that got in the way of Victoria and made it a little bit challenging to get down here. So it's been 5 years. But it's, you know, I should say it's a pleasure to come back, and I was also going to say it's always a pleasure, but it's hardly always a pleasure. It was a pleasure last time I was here, and it's been a pleasure again to come back because I like this club. It's a really nice club. You're lucky to have this club. You're lucky to have the people in the club. It's a very friendly place. It's a very welcoming place.
Yes.
And, you know, bonsai after all, it's about friendship and fellowship more than it is about anything else. And you've got plenty of that, and you're very lucky to have it. So embrace it and hang on to it and make the most of it because it's really good. So, yes, I was here 5 years ago and I was talking about choosing the shape of our trees. And remember, I was talking about conifers, and I was talking about broadleaf trees and the fundamental differences between them. And I was talking about black pine styling versus broadleaf styling. Well, I'm still on the same bandwagon. And I've come up with this Trojan horse called Australian Native Bonsai because people are much more open to the idea of a different styling model for natives than they might be for some of the exotic species that have been styled in a traditional sort of way. So when you have a look at Australian Native Bonsai, you'll see it extends a little bit from that earlier book called Bonsai Foundations. Covers much of that kind of same ground, but actually goes a step further. It encourages people to grow natives, encourages people to grow natives and style them so they look like the natives that we see out and around in our communities and in our landscape. But it's a Trojan horse for all broadleaf trees. It doesn't apply just to natives, although it's dressed up to look like it applies to natives. So if you don't grow a native tree and you're only interested in exotics, it still applies to the styling techniques that you might apply to broadleaf exotic bonsai. So my journey with natives kind of started and with this styling model started a long time ago. So this is a picture of my bonsai nursery in 2012. And at that stage I had quite a large number of 20 plus year old trees, and you can see them all kind of sitting there. And you can see, if you focus on any of those trees, you can see kind of the styling model that was applied at the time. And that was around about the time where I'd go out in the morning and I'd have a look at my trees and I think, yeah, okay, I've done what I was supposed to do, but I'm not so happy with what I've done. Because they don't really look like trees. They look like something else. And I kind of started to fall out of love with them and realised that I needed to do something else. Here's another picture. So they were pretty well advanced at that time. This is a long time ago. This is kind of 14 years ago. So I started changing my bonsai, and I started getting away from those traditional styling models and going to a much more naturalistic model applying what I call broadleaf style to broadleaf trees. And so if I couldn't change these trees and disrupt the kind of model that I had, the branch styling and the apex styling, if I couldn't disrupt them, then I tried to cut the branches off and start again. And if cutting the branches off and starting again didn't work either, well, they either went in the bin or they got sold. And these days, if you have a look at my collection, it looks kind of much the same. The difficulty is that only about 10% of those trees, or should I say 10 of those trees that we looked at previously, are on the benches today. And all of the others have been replaced with younger trees and also with native trees. So these now are, yes, they're much younger. They're mostly native trees, but I go out in the mornings now and I look at my trees and think, oh, look at that. There's a whole bunch of trees here and they look like trees. And they make me much happier because of that. Here's another picture. So this was just taken a couple of days ago. This is kind of my collection. Most of them are natives now. Natives are fantastic bonsai subjects, and we are graced in this country with an absolutely huge diversity of things. These Atlas Living Australia is a site you can find online where they talk about each of the different species, and it's a place, a repository of naming and records about Australian species. And they produce these maps to show you where these particular genus and or species come from. And this is just a sample of the sorts of things. So you can see what we have available to us because we're such a big country. Very widespread, some of these genus. And of course, as you narrow down and look at a particular species, so Melaleuca bracteata, people here will know. I guess Quentin's got a very beautiful golden Melaleuca bracteata, which you would all know about. It's not actually native to this part of the country. It's not endemic here, but there's a little bit of it in Melbourne. I think that must be Quentin's tree. But you can see where it is. Now, the interesting thing when you start to look at this and you start to think about native trees is that you might have Melaleuca bracteata in your own, you know, you find it growing in Bunnings or whatever else. But if you were to buy one in Brisbane, or buy one in Sydney, or buy one in Cairns, they'll still be Melaleuca bracteata, but the leaf shape, the stem coloration, the formation of the leaf may well be entirely different. And what happens with evolution over millions of years is you get these little isolated populations of trees. And because of the particular environmental conditions within those locations, there will be a variation in the genetic arrangements of those trees and their particular morphology or their shape. And so what you think you have one species, in fact, there may be subspecies or sufficient variations that if you just collected Melaleuca bracteata around Australia, you drove around Australia collecting seeds and growing them, you'd end up with a dozen different sorts of Melaleuca bracteata. So not only do we have a huge number of species, but within those species, because of the huge geographical areas they occur in, there'll be genetic diversity within those populations. And so you can go on and on and on collecting them. And if you move around the country, as you go and visit nurseries, you will find that there'll be same species you might be familiar with, but it will look different. So huge diversity. I'm lucky because I live in Queensland. Not only is it warmer than here, but Queensland actually has half of Australia's number of Australian native species. And I think it's got something to do with our tropical climate, much more tropical climate. There's more diversity in the tropics. But also, not only do we have tropics, but we have a range of different habitat types as well. So there's a whole bunch of species that I'm playing with at the moment in Brisbane that come from central Queensland that have got huge potential for bonsai use. I've talked about them in the book, and I'm hoping to talk about them again at the symposium in a month's time. This was a picture I showed last time I was here. Again, just emphasising the difference between conifers and broadleaf trees. So fundamentally, they're different beasts. They have different growth habits, and if you, in developing a bonsai, work with their growth habit, you'll be more successful. If you're making a conifer, then style it like a conifer. If you're making it like a broadleaf tree, style it like a broadleaf tree. No greater illustration of that diversity than something like a hoop pine versus a ficus. And this is just an illustration from somewhere or other again, just showing the variation in habit of these two types of trees. Now, as I said, the book's a bit of a Trojan horse, because fundamentally there are two types of trees in the world. There's conifers and there's broadleaf trees. There's not a third type called Australian native trees. Okay? They're either conifers or they're broadleaf trees. We don't have many conifers on the mainland. Can anybody mention a conifer?
There's someone what?
Sorry?
What? He said calitris.
Yes, calitris. That deserves a chocolate.
No, he said it over there.
He said it over there. Ah, right, yes. Do you remember? I thought somebody was going to tell me about the chocolates last time. Anybody mention the chocolates? Remember the chocolates? You've forgotten the chocolates. You remember? Oh, Jared remembers the chocolates. Okay. I brought chocolates today. Anyway, here we go. So there are not many conifers on, and calitris is one of kind of the main ones we've got available. Tasmania's got a bunch of them, and I know some people in the room are actually growing various Tasmanian species right now. I mean, there's one over here on the beach. There's some wonderful conifers that you ought to be growing here. I really think you should, and I think they would grow here really well. So, but if you grow a Tasmanian conifer, then you grow it like a Tasmanian conifer. You're going to grow a Tasmanian broadleaf tree like a eucalypt. Well, like a eucalypt. So, and Australian trees, yes, I mean there's not a separate category for Australian trees, they're just either they're broadleaf or conifer. But most of our natives are broadleaf trees. So most of my comments when I talk about native trees will have to do with broadleaf trees. This is how our native broadleaf trees go. So the classical models for training bonsai is to turn them into a pyramid shape. That's the old style world of turning them into a Christmas tree or black pine styling. But in fact, our native trees tend to grow the other way, like a V. And we get this divided trunk happening. And out of that division of the trunk, we have a number of trunk lines going up, and you can see in the bigger photograph. So we have this kind of V shape with a lot of vertical elements. And trees have got two types of parts to them. They've got these parts that are more vertical than lateral, and then they've got the laterals that are more lateral than they are vertical, and then it kind of goes up to the top. It's a bit like we see in the top of Jared's beautiful tree over here. So there's divisions down low in the tree to provide a divided trunk line, and then there's another division, and then when each of those trunk lines go up, they divide further, and out of those divisions we create a nice rounded canopy. That's classic Australian native broadleaf style. It's also classic broadleaf style, not just Australian native. So if you're growing an elm or a maple, well, why would you apply exactly the same model to that? And it's important that you do apply that model, because when you're growing an elm or a maple or some other deciduous species, at some point in time you have to create the apex and the canopy of the tree, and you can't do that if you've got a single trunk line that goes right to the very end, because the canopy has to be formed by multiple elements that go up so that you can create that broad rounded canopy rather than have one point. And if you continue to only take it to that one point, you'll always continue to chase it higher and higher and higher, because you cannot stop it going up. So divide the trunk, find a convenient location to divide the trunk, and create the canopy of the tree out of a number of vertical elements that go up to build that canopy. That's kind of the model that I'd like to see. And so we see this kind of thing happening. So you get these divisions, these trunk divisions. Now this isn't showing the laterals, the branches, it's just showing the trunk divisions. This is just some of the sort of alternatives. And you can find Jerry's tree here somewhere. I also talk about Australian style, because it's kind of being talked about more and more lately. Should we have an Australian style? And I think what's happening is that people are growing more and more natives, and in growing those natives they're giving themselves permission to style the trees differently from the old models that we used to apply. And therefore what we're doing with natives is being perceived as a separate style, an Australian style. And yeah, okay, if people need that kind of excuse to do that, well, that's terrific. What I've shown, and these were some of the illustrations from Bonsai Foundation, which kind of were on the same bandwagon. These are illustrations from the current book, which just shows you the difference in the canopy design and apical design that comes with the traditional model of flat branches, which with a single branch, with a single point at the top, that people try and terminate, prune it, prune it, prune it, prune it, and you get a broom forming in the top, and you get a fist. and loss of all the taper. And this is traditionally what happens when people try to use a single trunk design for a broadleaf tree and try and terminate it. And you see them online all the time. People proudly post pictures of their trees with these brooms in the top looking for positive affirmation about the wonderful tree they've got. And what a wonderful place the world of Facebook is, because it gets some very bad press sometimes, but every time I see one of these trees posted online, I see nothing but positive comments, which is really kind of strange. But this is what I'm talking about in terms of division. And the other thing you can see in the illustration here is if you look at the branch structure, that every time there is a division, it's only a division into two, which is what I call binary division. 1, 2. And every division you can see in that illustration is a binary division. And if you use binary division in developing your tree, you'll get a nice, logical, reasonable, natural architecture that gives you all the flexibility you need to achieve what you need to achieve to create that rounded canopy. And we'll come back to that later on, because we're not here just to talk about the book. We're going to here to talk tonight, we're going to talk about the development process for a bonsai. So this is just an advertisement, sorry. Talking about Australian style, you go looking online for illustrations of style. If you search for style, these things come up. You will have all seen them. Now, the problem is they're all conifers or pine trees. There's one in here that's a broom style zelkova to show you what you do with a broom. And it's really hard to find some guidance and get some guidance about what you do with native broadleaf trees, or, don't tell anybody, broadleaf trees in general. So I've come up with a style guide. It's coming, it takes a while to load. So the book's got models, all of these models, for all sorts of different stylistic models that you can apply to your broadleaf trees. And it gives you a kind of an explanation and shows the evolution and the development of a whole range of different alternatives. A lot of them are very much in this multi-trunking model, or divided trunking model, which I've talked about. It also covers all sorts of stuff about cultivation. And I've kind of sourced commentary and advice from people right around the country, talking about what they do, what their practices are, what their potting medias are, what their seasonal patterns are, what they do with repotting, what they do with major development pruning, what time of year they do that, because I think that's kind of interesting that it comes from information from around the country rather than just my own experience. And that's what I'm doing. So this is just a melaleuca that I reprinted back in September when I needed some photographs of the book. I did it in March when I did the reprint. So, and this is the development process that I advocate also, which I call binary cut and grow. So binary, again, a division in two. You prune the tree, it produces a proliferation of shoots. Reduce those shoots to 2 and use those 2 to develop a tree within a cyclical process. And we'll come to that and I'll demonstrate it to you again soon. So that's the book. Thank you for your patience. Binary cut and grow. That's what I'm here for tonight. Is it time for tea yet? What time do we have tea?
You just keep talking.
Okay, so a couple more slides from last time, because I want to kind of bring you back to the speed we were at previously. And I showed you this one last time when I said, are these bonsai? No, I'm not sure. Okay, so I'm careful I'm creeping up on you. So what about these? Are they bonsai? Yeah, they'd be nice in a pot though, wouldn't they? I mean, what sort of pot would you put them in? Would you put them in? Yeah, okay, we won't go there. What about these? Is that bonsai? Okay, what about that? Is that a bonsai? Ah, well, that's in Saitama in Japan. It must be a bonsai. Well, that's a bonsai. Why aren't these? And if they're bonsai, why isn't that? It's difficult, isn't it? What about that? Absolutely bonsai. Can you see the trunks inside? Can you see one trunk? How many trunks can you see? Many trunks.
At least 3. At
least 3. Okay. So I'm not on my own in promoting the division of trunk lines. And when you have more trunks than one, if on one trunk line you've got 6 branches, you can't make a credible version of a tree. Not with 6 branches. You've got to have 10 or 12 or 15 branches to make a tree look credible. But if you've got 3 trunks and they've each got 6 branches, wow, we're up to 18. It's starting to work. So that's why you have more trunks. What about this? Is that a bonsai? Absolutely. That's a celebrated Japanese maple. And look at the trunk lines on it. Not so different really from a eucalypt. From the sort of eucalypts, you might see somewhere. Really isn't. So broadleaf trees are broadleaf trees, doesn't matter where they're from. And I talked about what we do in the West versus what we do in Japan. So the top line is what we've done in the West in the past. It's what we've done in Australia. We create trees with single trunks, flat branches and bobblehead tops. Remember? Bobbleheads. And we get to a point like in this one and really don't know how to stop it, and don't know how to finish it, and don't know how to make a canopy. And it's not a credible canopy. And kind of none of them really are. Whereas this is what the Japanese do. The Japanese stylistic models are supposed to be our stylistic foundation, and yet we've not done what they've done. So this is the model we should be following. This is some other form of development that is kind of, I hope, regressive and is going to disappear. There was some more. This was at the AABC convention in 2017, so quite a while ago now, and there were stacks of them. Not quite cloud trees, but kind of not trees. So, the one on the bottom right is a lily pillar. Have you ever seen a lily pillar looking like that? But it was the old default model, where people didn't have a view themselves about what to do with their trees. They went to a club somewhere and they submitted their tree to somebody who'd been trained by somebody who'd been trained by somebody who talked to some Japanese guy at some point in time. And so that old model of left, right, back, 6 branches and a bobblehead. Every tree, every species was exactly the same. Fortunately, it's starting to diminish, and we're kind of moving on from there. This was the AABC convention in 2014, just weeks ago. It's changed, it's got better. I could only find 4 to show you out of the exhibition space. They're not as bad as the ones before, but they're not there yet. So the challenge is, can you find a Chinese elm, a real Chinese elm that looks like that, or a real broadleaf tree that looks like that? And the answer is that well, it's not. So what's it designed to look like? It's designed to look like a bonsai. What's that about? So make your bonsai look like trees, not make your bonsai look like a bonsai. But also it says, have your own ideas about what you want your bonsai to look like. So that when you come to a workshop like we had yesterday or today, I say, okay, nice tree. Where are we going with this tree? What would you like it to look like? You've then got to say, okay, this is what I want it to look like. Because I thought about this, I know what this tree should look like, this is what I want to do with it. I've seen this tree somewhere. Look at this photograph. I want it to look like that. It's much easier for me than to say, okay, that's easy, we can do that. Because you can build these things basically to a plan using that binary cut and grow technique. And it comes down to your preferences, your aesthetic preferences. There are lots of different models from all over the world of what small trees in pots look like and what an attractive small tree in a pot can look like. And there are all sorts of different ideas. There's no wrong ideas. There's a whole bunch of right ideas. And I know someone who really loves these things. And this lady comes to my workshops and she asks me for guidance on how to make them look like that. But she's got this idea. I know what she likes. And she says, this is what I want. I said, that's fine. We'll do this. So I can help you with that kind of stuff. But where do you stand on that spectrum? So you need to work out where your preference lies. And once you've got your preference, then kind of life in bonsai is easier after that. So it comes back to questions like, is this a bonsai? Well, it's a Vietnamese version of a tree in a pot. And the Vietnamese do this all the time. And kind of they love them. They have a different aesthetic. They would define their aesthetic differently. I define my aesthetic as an aged tree in miniature. So you've got to put words to your aesthetic preference. How do you define what it is that's beautiful about a small tree in a pot? Your own words, how do you describe it? I don't know what the Vietnamese would use to describe that. It would be some sort of spiritual, religious reference, I would think. This tree is an Australian tree, one of those proudly posted on Facebook trees. Again, it's got left, right, back, bobblehead. Very, very difficult to deal with. Very difficult to deal with. And that's the problem, is that this model is kind of unsustainable, because once you get to evolving, how do you prune it? Because the more you prune it, the more active it is, because at the top of the tree it wants to do it again and do it again and do it again. And so you lose all your proportion in this single trunk model up here. But if you divide your trunk close to the base of the tree, you end up with multiple trunks. And if you've got multiple trunks, as you get to the top of the tree, you've got multiple vertical elements. And each of those multiple vertical elements are finer and lighter in weight and much more easy to manage and more sustainable in the longer term. This is an unsustainable model. The only thing you can do with this is every now and then cut the top off and do it again. Much better at this point to divide the trunk and have a second trunk comes up. Maybe one smaller than the other. There's the model. You can't find a better model. I said to Jared, why didn't I know about your tree? I would have put it in my book. And I will for the second edition. And don't forget black pine dreaming. Okay? We've all been programmed. We've all been corrupted into this black pine styling. It's in our heads about what a bonsai should look like, and it's really, really hard to buck. People just want to make horizontal branches and points and triangular shapes. No, wait, what sort of tree is it we're working on? We're working on a broadleaf tree. What does a broadleaf tree look like? Well, don't do that. But very proud of posting his tree online. Dreaming about blacks. And then you see pictures like this. But it's a Christmas tree, it's a ficus. You don't see many ficus Christmas trees. Pictures from Bonsai Foundations. Western Universal, I call this. So this is what we're just looking at, black pine style. Horizontal branches, branch pads, little roomy top. But that's just a young roomy top, you wait till it grows. And then single trunk, much more Japanese model. Divided trunk, kind of 25%, 30% from the top of the tree. And then alternative model. There's Jared's tree, or a version of it. And then over here we've got multiple divisions low down in the tree. Now this, if you were to distort that and make it wider than it is high, it's a ficus model. If you make it a little taller, it's a eucalypt. Yeah? You see that everywhere. Walk out the door here, you'll see them out in the park. So if you're looking for bonsai models for broadleaf trees, they're just around us all the time. But I did say you do get to choose your aesthetic, because there are different models all around the world about what works and what they should look like. And if you have a different idea and you want to use some different words to describe what it is to you that makes it beautiful, well, that's terrific. But it's really good to be able to use some words to describe it. Choose your own aesthetic, best if you can. Binary cut and grow. I just keep on getting off track, don't I? So, how do we develop bonsai? That model that we've talked about, and the discussion about choosing a position on aesthetic profile spectrum, is really just to get you in a position so you know what to do with a single shoot that might emerge from a stump or a tube stock tree when you prune it. So you prune it and you get some shoots. The question is, what do you do with those shoots? This is where binary cut and grow comes in, because that shoot might come from a number of different sources. It might be from a collected tree, and when you collect a tree, you've got to develop a rational branching structure for it. You've got to develop a rational apex design for it. And each of those elements you'll develop starting with just one shoot in a particular direction. You've got to know what to do with that one shoot. It might come from nursery stock. It might come from a tube stock. A tiny little plant like the ones we've got at the back of the room there that's got one little leader. What do you do with that to develop bonsai? It might come from a rejuvenation. You might get to a point where you've had a Western Universal tree and you're sick of looking at it, you cut the branches off and you want to start again. I've been there, I know what it's like. You get these shoots, you have to work on what to do with them. A trunk chop, classic way in which you can start with a big heavy trunk to build a bonsai. How do you deal with that transition from a big stump to actually rational branching? How do you create the upper part of the tree? A seedling, a cutting, could be a fusion job. Whatever source that you might find, and you might ever have, for the creation of a bonsai, requires some kind of rational process to develop that part of the structure of the tree. And binary cut and grow offers you that process. You start with pruning. So you might have this shoot, you prune it. It reshoots. So you reduce the reshoots to 2 or 3 per lead. And you make sure that those 2 or 3 are in a kind of a binary arrangement, never more than 2 in one place. You wire those selected shoots for shape. You let it grow. And balance resource allocation. So the resource allocation balance is some parts you might tip prune on the strong parts to let the weak parts grow. Upper parts will be strong, lower parts will be slow. If you're trying to develop a whole tree, the upper part of the tree is going to be particularly active, so you have to slow it down. And you have to build the tree from the base up. So you've got to get the bottom branches set before you even think about the top branches. And so you've got to repair the top of the tree. And so this is resource reallocation, an important part of the process. And I think this is really important too. And you see that I saw it in the workshop today, and I've seen it yesterday. I see it every workshop I go to. People bring me trees, and we talk about what we can do with them. But they've been allowed to grow without this step, and so you end up with these long straight elements in them that are beyond any bending or twisting to get movement, to dwarf and to show that miniaturisation. And this is an important part of the process early in the process of growing something. So it could be a tube stock plant like this. And in this one you can see what I've done is when it was much younger, when it was kind of that size, it's been wild. So the trunk line's got movement in it. Now, it's been wired, so it's been through that process. It's now in the let it grow process. And it's been allowed to grow and extend, and you can see it is automatically started to create branches. And what happens is with plants is they tend to send out a long shoot. Either by disturbing the apical bud or just automatically, they will start to create branches. But these branches are too far away from that distance to be useful in creation of a bonsai. And the trap some people fall into is to think that they can use this and use this material to create branches on a tree, when really what you've got to do is you've got to come back down here somewhere and cut the tree again and force it to do that all over again. So it's grow, cut, grow, cut, grow, cut. Now, depending on the species you're doing this to, you've got to work out whether you cut within leaf, when there are leaves here, or beyond leaf. If you cut beyond leaf, are you confident that it will reshoot again? If you're not confident, you cut it into leaf. If you cut it into leaf, you can be very confident that it will shoot again. But if it's a broadleaf tree, 99.95% of them will be able to reshoot into bare wood. But that's the process you use. So for that type of material, this cyclically model of binary cut and grow is the one to use. If it's a stump, classic stump with reshoots happening on it. So there's one shoot here. How do we manage that shoot to turn it into a credible branch if we want to do it? There's other shoots. Each of these shoots needs a technique to develop them into what you want the future of the tree to look like. This is an example of a collected tree. So this is what it was like when it was collected. Collected, put in a poly box, branches selected, then allowed to grow. You can see the amount of growth that they are allowed to put on. This is the tree as it is now. Currently in Canberra for a short time. So you can see each of these kind of branches or these trunk lines here where they were cut off. It's kind of in that position. So the process of developing this structure on top of this material is just through the application of that binary cut and grow. And if you kind of work through the tree and have a look at it in detail, you can see that all of those junctions are binary junctions. You know, perhaps you can start with something like that and turn it into that. I'm only joking. You'd never do that, would you? No, but actually you could, because it's the same thing. And this is what I would like to offer you as an example of a lower branch in the tree, of the sort of thing we should be looking for in broadleaf trees. So it's what I call a three-dimensional branch. It's not a two-dimensional branch. A two-dimensional branch is a pad that you might find on a pine tree. It's got width and it's got length, but it's otherwise fairly flat. You can get a piece of paper on all of those kind of trees and slip them in. Sit pieces of paper here, piece of paper there, piece of paper on top of the pads in a tree. That's not broadleaf. You won't do that with a broadleaf tree. This is what a broadleaf branch structure should look like. So it has pieces that go left and right, and pieces that go up and down. And as we did today in the workshop, and as we did yesterday in the workshop, sometimes with styling and restyling of broadleaf trees where the branch structure has been flattened, the way to disrupt that is to take one element down and the other one up. And in fact, to put them one on top of the other. And by putting them one on top of the other straight away, you're creating a three-dimensional branch structure. Much more realistic branch structure. Now, the old teaching and the old model was anything that grows up, you cut it off. Anything that grows down, you cut it off. It's a recipe for making something flat.
Stephen, you sound like you need it. Do you want milk?
And as you'll try to run as well. Lovely, thank you.
With milk?
Yeah, there you go. That's good, thank you.
Do you want to leave that in or?
No, that's good, thank you.
Okay.
Lovely. Thanks, Phil.
Sorry about the rum luggage.
Yeah. Now, we don't see a lot of broadleaf trees with highly complex branch structure like that, and the Japanese are really good at doing this sort of thing. But it's got to be our ambition is to try and aim for that sort of stuff. But it kind of takes a lot of diligence and a really lot of effort, and a lot of pruning and repruning and management of that reshooting. And you can see that throughout the tree there is what I call fan-branched architecture. So the lower branches come down, and as you move up the tree, the branches come up. And you can see the canopy structure is made up of a multiplicity of upward pointed branchlets. That's how you create a rounded canopy. And so you can't create a nice rounded canopy of that if you've only got a single trunk line that goes up the top. Because if you only have a single trunk line, you take branches off it horizontally because you've got to fill the space. But then when you start pruning at the top, you get that room again. It's just not going to work. The only way it works is with multiple elements that go upwards and outwards in the top. And branches that at an intermediate level go down and out and tips up. Lower branches that go over and down and up and out. Follow that model and you create a good bonsai. So I'm going to talk about how to go through this process, but it's sort of helpful to talk about why doesn't it work or how does the development process fail for a lot of people. One of them is that developing material is allowed to grow unconstrained. So, bonsai is all about people controlling the agenda of development and not leaving it in the hands of the tree. If you leave it in the hands of the tree, it will do what it wants to do because it wants to be out there somewhere. So if you allow it to grow unconstrained, it will grow unconstrained, it'll be unbalanced. Some parts will be heavy and some parts will be light, but they'll all be straight. And if you then decide, okay, I've let it have its grow, I'm going to go back and now turn it into a tree or into a bonsai, you won't be able to do anything with those branches because they're too stiff. So you have to work early with early material while it's still flexible to give you the movement. And that's a matter of wire on, let it grow, firm up, wire off, let it grow. So, there's this popular mythology that we must let our bonsai grow. And we must. We give them a run. But we mustn't let them grow under their terms. We must let them grow under our terms. And our terms is that they are wired and shaped and then allowed to grow. Training begins too late and the growth that has happened is incorporated into the design. So it's a bit like that early tube stock I showed you. Somebody gets that tree and say, oh, look, I bought this lovely little tree, I'm going to turn it into a bonsai. It's got all these wonderful branches on it, they look great, I'm going to use those. But sorry, you can't use that stuff. You've got to cut it off. You only bought the bottom 50 millimetres. You bought this tree, but that's the only bit that's got any value. The rest of it's got to go. I'm sorry. That's the only bit that's any good. And that's where you start. So don't try and buy an advanced tree and think that you can use it all. That's not what it's there for. Insufficient branches are developed and these are tasked to do too much to fill gaps, growing out proportions. This inevitably comes with that single trunk model. single trunk model, 6 branches, and a branch will come out. And because there's so much space that needs to be filled, because there are only 6 branches, they have subsidiary branches and subsidiary branches. And part of the branch goes out here, and part of the branch goes out there. And it has this huge solar collector. And with a huge solar collector, all of those trees create wood. And the channel, like a river, comes back to the branch that goes to the tree. And it doesn't take very long before that branch is the same diameter as the trunk, blowing out your proportions and destroying any illusion of it being a dwarf tree. The only way you can do it and create a useful illusion is to have a trunk with a branch that comes from it with very few leaves. With few leaves, the thickness and the weight of that branch remains in proportion to the trunk. That is much smaller. And you can only have a branch with very few leaves if there are a lot of branches. So branch density, the number of branches you have, is a very important thing. You cannot build a convincing bonsai with 6 branches. It doesn't work. You really can't do it with 8. 10, you might get away with it. A dozen, it's starting to work. So if you've got a tree this big and it's only got 6 branches, I would say to you, there's nothing I can do to help you until it's twice as high. And then it'll have 12 branches and we can do something. You've got to get to that number. It's a good count. Ramification is started too early, suppressing growth and impairing development of major elms. We're all too impatient, aren't we? We just want to get on and get this thing looking pretty. So we tip prune the life out of it, cause it to reshoot, tip prune it again, and we start to get into ramification really quickly. If we do that too soon, well, we lose the opportunity of developing any girth or mass in the trunk. And that's one of those aesthetic things that we're hoping to achieve in bonsai, is the disproportionate size of the trunk to the height of the tree. But we can kill all that really quickly by getting into ramification too early. So we have to be patient and we have to build the tree from the ground up, from the inside out, and at the same time wait for secondary branches, wait for tertiary branches, wait for ramification until we've achieved our objectives in the core of the tree. Too much pruning for pruning's sake. I know folks who go out to look at their trees in the morning and they take their scissors with them. If you've got scissors in your hand, you're going to be tip pruning. Put the scissors down, don't touch the tree. And workshops, click, click, why did you cut that off? It's what we do. So, if you're going to cut something, have a reason to cut it off. If you walk out with your scissors in the morning, and you're going to go tip pruning, which bits do you tip prune? And sometimes there are. And it's this thing about resource development and resource balancing. So go out with scissors in the morning and just hammer the top of the tree if it's developing, because that's where it wants to be active. Just chop it off and don't think about it, and let the lower parts grow. You can always redevelop the top of the tree in about 10 to 15 minutes. It'll grow again at some time, so no problem. But if you cut all the tips off the bottom part, well, the tree will say, oh, wow, we don't need those branches. Boom, out of the top, and they're gone, and they're locked, and they're left behind, and they're the wrong weight, and proportions gone again. So you build it from the ground up. Hammer the top, keep it down, so if you must walk out with your scissors in the morning, only cut the top of the tree. Response to regrowth after pruning for structural development. Okay, fine, this is binary development. So we all know lots of our trees, not just the native trees, I mean, corky bark elms are prodigious reshooters. You prune them, boom, you get dozens and dozens of shoots in a very small space of time. You can't afford the tree to allocate its resource to all of those shoots, because if it does that, it tries to grow all of them. They'll all be tiny little hair-like branches that actually don't turn into anything. But if after pruning you get a dozen shoots over a length of 20 millimetres, if you prune those down to just 2, and the tree will allocate its resources to just 2 rather than 22, those 2 will give you some material that you can actually use to develop structure. So binary development is very important. And it's kind of this issue of us taking control of the development of our trees so that they end up doing what we want them to do, not what they want to do. Failure to effectively balance resources. I think I probably talked about that. Unsustainable apex designs and low branch density. I think I covered that as well. More branches you need, and work out, even before you start, how are you going to finish this tree? What's it going to look like? What's the top of it going to look like? And how am I going to compose that? And this is the only sustainable kind of model. It really is. For a broadleaf tree. Choice of design aesthetic on the run, following rather than leading the tree. Once again, kind of take control, don't let the tree dictate to you. And I know there are people who say, and still say, I'm kind of waiting for the tree to tell me how I should style it. Oh my God, seriously? I'm sorry, but we're in control here. I want this tree to be what I want it to be, and it will be what I want it to be because it can be that way. And also, the tree grows at one point in time when it wasn't being attended to, or somebody was coming on holidays and they came back and they found the tree had grown in a certain direction. Think, I've got to change of plan now. I'm going to go with the tree because it wants to go in that direction. Work out your aesthetic, work out your plan, stick to the plan, go to binary branching and develop it the way you want to develop it. Okay? Any questions? Any comments? Everybody happy? Yeah. Okay. So here's our little tree with the pot that we've got. We're going to develop it into a bonsai. This is one path we can take. So one path is in a short space of time, we can put on a lot of trunk girth. I mean, how do we do that? Let it grow.
The more something grows, the sooner it's ready for the sawmill.
Okay, and there we go. That means it's got a big trunk, which is, hey, terrific. So we can put it in the ground, we can put it in a big pot, we can just let it grow and come back to it in 2 years' time, can't we? And we know with some confidence it'll have a trunk. And in 2 years' time, we've got to do something about that. So in 2 years' time, we've got to do a trunk shop, we've got to get some shoots, we've got to kind of start to develop secondary branches, And so we do the fast acceleration, building the mass of the trunk. And then over time, we do the ramification and development of branches and diameter. It takes a long time, and it takes a long time to get there because that's a lot of fiddly work, it's very fine sort of work. But we build the trunk mass, which is the important part. And if you've got access to a big chunky piece of bonsai material, or a plant that you get out of the ground, or somebody's grown it for 10 years and you've lopped it off, I mean, that's precious, that's gold. Because it's really, really hard to replicate that. And it's a great source of a big chunky piece of material. The trick is to finesse that chop, to develop the branch structure. But a big trunk is gold, it really is. So this kind of model is good. The other alternative is to get your small trunk and prune it mercilessly every time you go out and see it in the morning. And so what happens is your trunk girth doesn't grow very much. It takes a long time for the trunk to build any mass because you're always pruning it. Snip, 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 snip. You don't put any weight on it. It doesn't have a lot of leaves. It's not building a lot of timber. It can't get there. And it takes forever. But eventually, over a very long period of time, like longer than most people in the room have got, you get there. Okay? It might be 20 years. So that's another path. You can pursue that path. For most of us who are impatient and really would like to be on this track but still want a big trunk, there is a middle ground, okay? And it looks like this. And so you can get a middle ground where you can do both. You can build your trunk and you can build your ramification. It sounds like magic, doesn't it? Because bonsai is full of dichotomies, and this is the bonsai dilemma. Do I build branches or do I build trunk? I can't do them both. But maybe you can. Has anybody got an idea how you do both? You put a sacrificial branch on a tree. Or you put 2 sacrificial branches on it. Or you put 3 sacrificial branches on it. We've got a tree over here, the West Australian species. And you can see on the back of the tree, a branch has been allowed to continue to grow so that it can be a sacrificial branch. Because what it will do is you can allow it to grow unconstrained while you're messing about putting branches on the other part of the tree, and the bit that grows unconstrained fattens the trunk up. It works like a treat. It works like a treat. But the sacrificial branch really doesn't come into effect until it's almost the diameter of the trunk itself. But once you get there, it adds up. And it works, and it builds. So you can pursue that middle path. So if you're starting from a young piece of material, it's an ideal way to build girth on a tree and satisfy our own impatience to turn it into a bonsai, is to put some sacrificial branches on it. I've got some pictures I'll show you in a minute, but there's one that's in the room, so I encourage you to have a look at it. there are a couple of stages. One is to build early movement and bulk in this shoot, wherever it is, whatever it comes from. Early movement and bulk. Wire, and then let it grow while it builds that mass. Then you build the core primary elements around it. Now, if this is a branch, we're talking about the secondary elements, the secondary branches. If it's a tube stock tree, we're talking about the primary branches. It's those first few divisions of the trunk. It could be a trunk division. Instead of one trunk going up, you might divide that into two and have two going up. So this is a core primary element to development. It's when that first division in Gerard's tree was made, right down there 100 millimetres from the ground level. And it was one shoot that was pruned and turned into two. So when you take it in terms of building it from the ground up, building it from the inside out, that's the first core primary element division taking place. And then you slowly work your way up the tree as those shoots grow. You might prune it again and get a second division, as there is on the main trunk line on the right-hand side. A second division. So this is the development of the core elements of the tree, the inner elements, the major parts of the tree, the major structural components of the tree. They're the things to think about focusing on first. And if you buy a stock tree, if you buy a tree off the table, here on the table, off the sales table, or at a show or a nursery, well, look at that area of the core structural component of the tree and say, are you happy with that? Because you're going to have to prune it somewhere. But you keep looking in and in and into that core structural element. If you get to a point that you're happy, well, that's good. But how far do you go before you're unhappy with the core structural elements? And if you're unhappy with those core components, that tells you where you've got to prune it. Because you come back and you've got to build that further from the inside out. And then it's secondary, then it's tertiary, and the ramification there. So those four stages are important. You've got to get the inside of the tree done first. So stage one is build early movement and bulk. Wire early to allow it to grow and lock in movement before pruning. So here's our little shoot. Again, it's illustrated as a tube stock tree, but it can be a shoot on a stump. Reminded of this Gumby. It's called a Gumby tree. And I think the other thing that's kind of interesting looking at this Gumby, if you take a close look at it, you can see the nodal pattern that it has by where the leaf arrangement is on the stem. Now, there are all sorts of different nodal patterns that make development either easy or more challenging. And so you can see here it's neither opposite, which is one leaf, which is like a lily pad, one leaf on one side, one leaf on another, and some melaleucas, which makes that difficult because when they reshoot you get 1, 2, 3, and all of a sudden you've got to deal with the non-binary arrangement of that branching. This will give you an automatic binary branching, but also they're arrayed around the trunk. So they will come out at different places on the trunk. So oftentimes those trees that have got a kind of an opposite nodal pattern or alternate nodal pattern are on a flat plane. And if you allow branches to grow on a flat plane, it kind of looks juvenile because it's flat. And so you end up having to wire it and twist it or do some sort of pruning so that you can create something that kind of is a bit more realistic. But a species that does this, really, you're going to make your job a lot easier. So when you're choosing material, particularly native material, have a look at that nodal pattern because there are some that work and make it a lot easier than others. Okay, so trunk mass versus ramification, nodal pattern, fishboning. Okay, fishboning is that thing where they're kind of in a flat plane. You've got to have to disrupt that somehow or other. And you can disrupt it by putting a piece of wire on it and turning what was a flat model into a spiral one. So out of a species that have alternate nodes in a flat plane, by spiraling it, you can turn it into what was there for the Gumby. So this is wiring, getting the movement in it. Once you've got the movement in it, you let that grow. Because at some point in time, you're going to come back and prune it somewhere to get the first branching, either a branch or a divided trunk. So this is the first step. And that issue of twisting is not an unnatural thing because there are plenty of trees that have this kind of twisted bark pattern. And you can create that twisted bark pattern simply by starting with a piece of wire, twisting the tree up in the interest of disturbing that nodal pattern for later branching. But you can create some interest also in the trunk line by doing that. And then you let it grow once you've got that initial movement in it. Happy that, as I said, you're going to come back and prune it some one time, so you let it grow and it puts on some weight. So what do we know about trees when we're going to prune them? anticipating pruning? Well, we know that they shoot most vigorously close to where we cut them. Okay? So, I come against this quite often where people have some material and we say, okay, well, where are we going to prune this? And they kind of point up here. And I say, well, where do you want branches? I want the branches down here. Well, if you want the branches down there, and you're pruning it up there, where's the tree going to shoot? It's going to shoot up there. So if you want branches down here, prune it down here. So you prune it where you want the branches or in close proximity to the branches because that's where they're going to shoot. We also know that tip pruning generally results in a replacement shoot. So if you tip prune it, you're more than likely to get one replacement. But if you tip prune it and defoliate, you'll get lots of shoots. If you prune back beyond leaves, you'll get lots of shoots. So you want to make sure that you get lots of shoots when you prune the thing so that you've got shoots to choose from that you want to use for the next stage of the development of your tree. Okay, so yeah, the story there simply is, this is kind of that tree, that selfish again. So that was the growth, and then you can see this trunk line through here. That's where it gets pruned. There's no attempt to keep any material beyond that because it's no good. This is where we want the next level branching down here. So you prune it where you want the branches. You say, thank you very much for producing that. I don't need it anymore. This is where I want it. And I want to finesse this chop. So this shoot needs to be of a certain weight. So I've got to let it grow till it's reached a certain weight before I prune it. And when I prune it, I'll leave two nodes there that I can see because I want two shoots there. And if I leave two nodes, I can be guaranteed I'll get two shoots. Once I've got two shoots, one of those can be a lateral element, one can be a vertical element. Or it can be a divided trunk element, where they both go up. But I've got that kind of opportunity. I mean, if we look at a natural tree in the natural environment, now, this happens to be in the UK, unfortunately, because I don't get to see very many deciduous trees in Brisbane. But if you look at this tree and look into it and think about the structure of the tree, you can see, as I said before, when we look at that mellow look at it, it's no different. Because the inner core structure is a V shape, with all of those major vertical elements coming from the one point but going upwards in a V, with a series of binary branching. So we have vertical elements and everything else is kind of a lateral element which we call branch, where they come out and go down and up. Or as we go through the fan arrangement, then they go slightly up and more up and more up, and then the canopy is made up of a whole lot of elements that go upwards and outwards. So there are vertical elements, there are lateral elements, and they're all built around a binary structure. And if this was a tube stock tree and you were starting it, and you said, I want to make a tree just like that, well, you could. You grow your tube stock tree, you prune it, and you've got a division 2. You let those two shoots go up, you prune one, there's your next division of 2, here's your next division of 2. You can build a tree to a picture if you want to, using that same model. And then you let it grow unrestrained. Next is the first cut. Okay, so we're talking about pruning it. That's where we were. And where you prune it kind of has got a little bit to do with how long have I got to build this tree and how big do I want the tree to be. But inevitably, I think if you aim to build a really nice small tree, you'll end up with a tree, a mid-sized tree that's really nice because they always get away from you and they're hard to constrain. So aim for something smaller rather than something larger. And so pick a spot to prune it, and you prune it. So here we are, pruning back to 2 leaves in the interest of getting 2 shoots. And there they are. Let's take the leaves off to guarantee that we get 2, and perhaps even more. And at that point in time, if not before then, we have to think about what's this tree going to look like in the future? Do I want it to have 2 trunks? Do I want it to have 3? Do I want it to have 5? Because what I do next with the shoots that come from here determines what it's going to look like in the end, because I'm building that core structure which over time I won't be able to change. Core structure, there's a ficus, nice rounded dome canopy, made up a number of trunk elements going up, but the core structure is the bit in the middle. This is the bit that you initially focused on building. Here's another picture of a gorgeous broadleaf tree. Look at the core structure of that tree. These are the things that you're building early. And not anything beyond that. And not working beyond that area until you're happy with that area. So you start with a first division, and then next divisions, and slowly you build it out. So it's being built from the inside out, from the ground up. Not accepting what the tree gives you. Pruning it where you want it to branch. So here we are, back at this little piece of material that we prune, and what do we know it does? It shoots. Oh my God, what do I do now? So you've got all of these shoots. And this is what a lot of our native material will do. As I said, I'm sure it's what a corky bark elm will do. I'm not sure it's what a maple will do. But a lot of the broadleaf trees we grow for bonsai will do this kind of thing. But certainly the natives, particularly the melaleucas, this is what they do. And you've then got to sort through that. So what do? We certainly don't do left, right, back. It's what we used to do. We then work our way through the tree and say, okay, well, the first branch has to be lower on the right, coming forward, and the next one's got to be a little on the left, and then there's got to be one on the back, and we remove everything that wasn't left, right, back, left, right, back. No, that's the wrong model. Okay, the model is binary is the rule. So what we do in the first instance is to remove all of those things that offend that binary rule. So many times you will get two shoots conjoined coming from the one point on the trunk. Wherever that happens, reduce it to one. That's just one way you can do that. What is binary? Okay. Here's the branch structure. Everything on there is binary. No more than two bits come together in any one place. Here's some typical kind of nodal pattern and branch development we get with various species. So this is the alternate nodal model where we get that right centre. 1, 2, 3. In this occasion, you either take the middle out or one of the sides to get binary. Here's another one which is kind of alternate. All of them binary. But when the internodal distance is small, they're too close together. And so you might keep that one, take that out, keep that one, take that out, so that they are branched and separated. Different strategies for different types of nodal patterns. But binary is the principle that's worth keeping to, and different ways in which you can prune that. Here's a real piece of material showing it has an alternate nodal pattern, but once again they're in a flat plane. So you can see this piece of material is lying flat on a sheet of paper. And this is the flat plane thing that happens. And if you allow that flat plane to be built into mature material, it looks juvenile. So you can't afford to do that. You have to disrupt this flat plane model. And then so you can either disrupt that flat plane model by pruning and selecting amongst the branches, or by wiring and twisting to get them out of the flat plane. If we're just going to use pruning, then there are a number of different ways you can prune it. So for one, you can prune it there, and we have a division into two. And out of that division of two, you can do something with it. Now, if this was vertically oriented, these could be a divided trunk line and you could shape them accordingly. Another alternative is that. So take three of them out. Binary, binary, binary. 1, 2, 3 kept. And in doing that again, you're creating something that's kind of a rational branch structure. There's well enough space to be able to do something sensible with it. Another alternative was something like that. Or was there one more in there? So we do that and we've got binary, binary, binary. Or take that one out as well. 1, 2, 3. And 3 on a small piece of material like that, as it matures and gets heavier, it separates them sufficiently for them to look reasonable and not cause any accumulative swelling from being close to each other. So this is kind of the level of the depth of definition you've got to get to in developing material. And it might be, on any of the trees here as they grow and as they shoot in spring, this is what you've got to do to create that rational branch structure. because the binary branching model is basically a V shape, and it's a building block. And you can treat it as a building block in building a bonsai, simply by stacking one V on top of the other. There's a V. V shape, V shape, V shape. And each of these V shapes is achieved by pruning, selecting two shoots, wiring them to shape. And you might, at some point, have one part of the V that's much longer than the other, depending on what your structural ambitions are. Prune, two shoots, wire, different shapes. V on V on V builds you a decent structure. Now this is just kind of flat, plain, two-dimensional thing. You've got to do it in 3 dimensions, of course, but it works in 3 dimensions just as well. Another natural tree in the natural environment, which you kind of, if you look into, more often than not, the divisions that you see are binary divisions. It kind of happens naturally. And so if you stick to binary division in a tree, more often than not, you'll build a structure that by observation looks more natural. So it's easier to achieve a decent structure, and visually it is a more natural appearance because it accords with what you see in the environment. So, how do you get to binary? Well, oftentimes you'll get this kind of thing happening. So you get 3 shoots happening from the one point, or 2 shoots from happening from one point. Straight away, you go back to 1. And you do it while it's young. And you do it while it's young because if you leave it till later, if you leave 2 there, and they develop, and you start to ramify the ends of them, those branches that you ramify have a place in the emerging tree, and it's too hard to come back and take one out later because they're now performing an important role in the structure of the tree. So come back to binary really early. The other thing that happens is you get these kind of basal shoots and crotch shoots. So you get a shoot that merges down in here. Trees will do that kind of once you've moved on. They'll come back and they'll shoot back in here. Or if you prune this part of the tree, they'll shoot from this because this is kind of an active, biologically active area, and they'll produce a shoot from there. So you kind of need to prune that out to preserve the binary structure. Thanks, Bill. You remove all those basal shoots, you remove those doubles and triples, all those crotch shoots, and binary's the rule again. So you remove the bars where one's on the other side, and you remove the never going to use shoots, which are kind of these things that come off the bottom or come out from the wrong funny shapes. And you get back to something like that. Okay? And maybe you think, okay, well maybe that's a start. Maybe I can use some of those. Then you say, well, are they too close? Are there too many? Are they in the right orientation around the tree? Can I use those or not? And so you look at them and say, okay, which of these am I going to turn into real elements of the tree? And which am I going to use kind of sacrificially to let them grow to fatten the trunk up, because I'm going to try and do both at the same time. This is the use of sacrificial materials. This is a sacrifice branch on a coastal tea tree. So the stick at the back is the sacrificial branch. It goes up and it's got its own kind of canopy way up there. And it was formed when it was just a little tube top tree. And it's contributing significantly to the thickness of the trunk. But you might want to have it there for 5 years. So you don't want to kind of be impatient and lop it off too soon. It works. This is a sacrificial branch on a branch. So a fig tree with a lower branch that was kind of got left behind and wasn't the right thickness. Allow a piece of material to grow, just one little shoot, you point it up and it grows and create a rooster tail. And over 2 years, the thickness of the branch on that tree doubled in size and was once again back in the right proportion. So a sacrificial branch can be on a trunk, it can be on a branch, it can be used anywhere. You can have 4 of them on a tree if you want to. The more you have, the more it'll work. And this is a picture of what the Japanese do to build those chunky little junipers. They've got a lot of twists and contortions and lovely deadwood on them, and they achieve them really quickly because they put 1, 2, 3, 4 enormous sacrificial branches on them, let them grow, keep some vegetative elements down close to the tree because that's the future of the tree in terms of future branching, let them grow, build the trunk quite thickly, then cut them all off. Because we all know how slow they are. And unless you do this, you kind of condemn to a small trunk for the rest of your life. You can grow a juniper for a small bonsai, but you really have to put a number of sacrificial branches on. Do what the Japanese do. This is sacrificial branches on a few little fig trees. It's hard to see, but you can see the scale of sacrificial branch in the back of this one that comes all the way down here, and the weight of there compared to the weight of there, it has contributed to that much more than this foliage load has. And that branch there was there for 5 years. This little ring here is an interesting story. When I was writing Bonsai Foundations, I wanted to have some pictures to talk about how to do air layering. So I thought, what am I going to do? I'm going to take some pictures of air layering. And I thought, oh, that's sacrificial branch. So I came out and I cut the ring of bark off to take a picture. It's in the book. It's in Bonsai Foundations. I got a cup, a little pot, suspended it around there, filled it with potting media, took another photograph. Took the pot down, got rid of the potting media, got the ring of bark that I'd cut off before. I put the ring of bark back, wound it with grafting tape. Carried on. Who cares, it said. Who cares?
That's amazing.
Well, and kind of, there's the evidence, so you know, there it is. It also told me that you get kind of this swelling and thickness because you get that callousing. So out of that I learned that if you've ever got any reverse tape on a tree that you want to fix, just injure the tree. Get a craft knife with a sharp point and just stab the bloody thing. And each of those little stab marks, you'll get callousing and swelling and it'll fill up that reverse tape in about 4 weeks. Problem solved. Now it's got to be a kind of a grainy sort of bark, otherwise it kind of stands out a bit. It works. So here's another one, another sacrificial branch, little tree, big sacrificial branch. Very important to balance the resources here because the tree thinks that's going to be the tree and it'll leave this behind. So if you prune this, you've got to prune that. It's kind of, so you've got to be very careful. But that's after the removal. You can create a little tree with a chunky tongue because you've used a sacrificial branch. This is achieving both aims, ramification and trunk thickness at the same time. So we're back at our little thing. So we take opportunities for compression. You can always have to push a tree back, otherwise it just gets muffled. So here's an opportunity. We've got too many branches there, we don't need them. We either cut the branches off or we compress them. So we compress it by taking the top out. We've got 2 sacrificial branches and 2 branches that are the primary elements of the new developing tree. Binary. Okay, consider the design preferences. Well, it could be a triple trunk, it could be a double trunk. You know, one of these sort of things, too early to say. And you know, here we are going around the cycle. We've done that first pruning, we've done the shoot selection. We're now going to let these grow. So we put some wire on them, we start to shape them and get ready for the next cycle. Here's the same process on a bigger piece of material. This is a fig that I was redeveloping. It was a ficus. You can see the branches that I cut off. Here, 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 here. Each of those branches that I cut off were kind of 25 to 30 millimetres in diameter, quite large. The tree as it was had these branches that went out 120, 130 millimetres, dead straight, round, heavy. I tried a couple of things to try and work out how I could use them, realised I couldn't cut them off. Cut them off, but at each location developed binary branching because figs produce lots of shoots. So here's a big stub with 2 shoots on it. 2, 2, 2, 2, all around the tree. And if you've got kind of like 6 old branches that I cut off, now I've got 12 branches. And out of those 12, I've pruned them again. And on each of these, I'm going to allow some branching to happen. How many? 2. 6, 12, 24. I mean, who can't build a bonsai with 24 branches? And who can't build a fig bonsai with 24 branches because we just want them to go up and out and out. So here we are, we've got our 4 branches, 2 of them are sacrifice, 2 are going to be growth elements. We keep the sacrifice branches going, but the ones that are going to be growth elements, we prune them again. And they shoot. And we're back into the same cycle of shoot selection. Choose the ones you want, go for binary. Maybe there's a 3rd one you can have this time. It's still binary, 1, 2, but the 3rd one's further down. That's also binary. You've got 2 and you've got 3. So you've gone from 2 to 6. And you start to build your tree. You've got the sacrificial branches to give you some trunk mass. And wire them for shape. So you wire each of these new shoots and you let them grow. Now, this is resource allocation. Okay, right now we've got to slow the sacrificial branches down, otherwise they'll take over and all this will just wither away and do nothing. So you can see where the pruning is. And as I said, the upper elements want to be really vigorous, so you prune those. Whereas you leave these alone, because these are going to be weak if you don't unless you let them go. So you prune the ones that are aggressively growing, the ones that are slower, because the branches are more lateral, they will start to slow down. But you want to keep the tips up and let them go and give them preference for a little while until they catch up. Because if we don't develop those branches now, we're going to lose the opportunity if we go any higher. And then we let things grow in. They kind of start to automatically branch up higher, but we're not going to use those, but it can do what it likes. Because we're just focusing on the core of the tree, the core structure. And that's it. And then we do it again. Again, there's a bit of resource allocation here on things that are strong. Slow them down, impair them. You know, you can always build the apex at any point in time because it's vigorous there. And then, you know, longer cycles will build more bulk, shorter cycles will build more ramification. So if you're prepared between these pruning cycles to extend them, so you know, if you're building a small tree in 5 years, the first year might be a grow without a prune. And then you prune at the end of the first year, you might grow for another year and then prune. And then after 6 months you might prune, after 6 months, after 3 months, after 3 months, and you slow the cycle down. And then as you get towards more ramification. This is just a small water gun that is being developed. And you can look in and you can see kind of where the binary development is. So there's the first branch, here's the second branch, there he's there, and there he's there. And you can see where it's been pruned. And you can see how the upper elements are much stronger than the lower ones. So impair the others to give these a chance to catch up. Another example of grow and cut just with a Melaleuca bracteata. And then after 4 or 5 cycles, you can kind of start to get to ramification. Those 4 or 5 cycles might take you a number of years, depending on what your climate is. But then you start to get to ramification. And you can begin to see that the model that was our ambition over the bottom right-hand corner kind of starts to be realised in the way in which we shape those elements, because each element that comes is either a vertical element or a lateral element. And then kind of you're on that middle path where you're actually developing the ramification and branch development while you're working on the trunk girth through binary cut and grow. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
I wish I learned all that at 35.
Sorry, say that again.
I wish I learned all that when I was 35.
Yeah, me
too.
too. Yeah, I know. But for those 35-year-olds in the room, aren't they lucky?
So I was going to say, last time you came here, 2019.
Yeah.
You talked. We had a bunch of trees that were all that triangular pine shape, and you talked about disrupting some of those trees.
Yeah.
I know you touched on it slightly,
but
I found it very helpful because I went back and I'm going, I've got to disrupt my triangular kind of trees. Can you talk a little bit, I don't know if you're slide, but talk a little bit about an established tree that's a triangular tree, without having to cut it all back, how you talk about disrupting by growing. I think you were saying to me, you grow those inside branches upwards, you start to take branches going upwards and disrupting that cycle. I mean, that's a really good really good example. Like, it's really quite good.
Okay. This is a classic, example of that question that David had about disruption. And we were doing some work on this today. And the observation was that a number of the branches were flat, but nonetheless inclined. So, like my hand, they were going upwards, but you could still put a piece of paper on top of them. So it wasn't horizontal and flat, but they were inclined and flat. And they kind of did need some disruption. And so that disruption process means that where you have a division of 2 and perhaps another division of 2, some of those parts can be taken up and some can be taken down, so that you end up with 3 dimensions. So this branch here now, as you see, has got elements that are higher and some that are lower. And so if you've got a tree like this and you want to kind of create that kind of impression, this lower branch here, this lower part, can be brought down and it can be brought across, so that it's almost below one of the other elements of the tree. And you start to create a branch structure very much like that Japanese model of a branch structure that I was talking about earlier. So this is a branch disrupted. And if you look again, even here now, there's this element and this element, they're both kind of on this plane. To disrupt that, this part at the back can be brought down. Wire's not quite strong enough. I've got wire.
There you go.
I know the wire was for something, though.
There you go.
That's good. So these two parts here, you see they're kind of in the same plane. Let me tip that over. You see how they line up in the flat area there? So the answer simply is to bend that one down and then turn the tip up. And so that when you look at it, they're no longer flat. And so then you look at the part that we bent down over here, and there are these two parts of that that are flat. So one of those can go down and one can go up. And once you start to do that, it puts this one down here. Just needs a little bit of wire to bring it back up. And here, and now in different positions. So when you look at this branch now, you've got a high point, a lower point, a lower point, and a lower point. And if you want, you can bring them across so that they're kind of almost one on top of the other. And if you really want to get into fine wiring, then this little piece here, you might kind of tip it up. Because remember, the tips that go up are the ones that grow preferentially. So this is kind of a flat branch that's now thoroughly disrupted and turned into much more the naturalistic style for a broadleaf branch. This one over here, you know, it kind of still needs a little bit more work because these two elements are still upwardly inclined. There's no reason why that part of the tree can't come down a little bit. And spin this around and turn these up like that. Crack. Nose in that.
Who said that?
Who said that? And so you start to break out the flatness of them. So there's no kind of no end. You can see even here, it's not flat, it's not inclined, but it's got a sideways inclination. So this one here needs some disruption of some sort. And it could simply be putting something like this down or taking that up and across there, and one there can come down and up and turn that up. It's this sort of stuff, just to get them out of the flat plane. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, it's one of the best things. One of the best things because it totally transforms the tree.
Yeah.
Even though you've grown that triangle, you can change it. So I just want to make sure everyone knows that.
So that's the branch disruption. The more challenging part is the trunk line disruption.
Exactly.
Because you've got it in the triangle.
Got it, yeah.
So what did you do with the apex?
I pretty much reduced it, and then but kept doing that to try and make it look less.
So you reduced it to try and round it off?
Yeah.
Okay, kind of reduce it, find two shoots and take them up.
Yeah.
Prune one at a different point from the other, then four, and then out of four you can kind of round it out. And you can do that in a small space.
What would you do here? with the apex there.
Well, what we have done here is, if you look at it, we've kind of got 1, 2. So we've got a trunk division here. So the trunk has divided at that point, and it's gone into kind of left and right. And the thing to do after that is, at the right time, prune it again and get 2 more. So that illustration that I had on the screen right at the start, where I had the bobblehead one versus the broadleaf one, you kind of slowly and progressively divide it and widen it. Now, the best answer would have been if there'd been another trunk that came from somewhere down here, again, Gerard's tree, that came up parallel to that. Now, if you can't get one coming from here, can you get one from here? Or if not, why not here? The lower down you do that division, the easier it is to build that broad, widening architecture. Now, in the book about natives, I talk about this single trunk model, which really only applies to trees that grow in forests. And they grow in forest because they're all close together, there's low light conditions, they've got to get up to get to the light. But anything that grows out in the open, the trunk line gets disrupted, so you get this branching happening. So this is kind of like a forest model. And it's got kind of like, it's got the artefacts of the old styling model because of the single trunk. But if you're starting from scratch, I would advocate this kind of model, regardless of whether it's an Australian native or any other sort of broadleaf tree. It's all the same. Because it's easier to manage, because it's hard to see. It's hard to see how you build that into a canopy. And once you've got to here, and you've got your division, which is really high in the tree, to try and create a canopy that's like that, which is where it needs to be, is quite difficult. And you can only really do it if you let the tree get higher and develop that kind of branching architecture to get up there.
Any more questions? All right, everyone. Thank you, Stephen. Thanks for coming down. All right, don't forget, Stephen's books are still for sale. Raffle tickets will draw shortly.